This is Mathiola and Cana, or to the more common tongue, if you don't want to sound like a wizard, stock. We can call it stock if you want to call it stock. It's not as much fun, but that's fine. But this is one of my favorite cut flowers. It just brings this like hint of like old school glamour to your garden. It's very like vintagey. It smells delicious and spicy, but it's not for everybody, okay? This is definitely not an easy flower. It can be a little bit tricky to grow, and it thrives on proper timing. So let's just jump into everything and find out if this is a good flower for your garden. Stock is a cool season annual, and it is a one-hit wonder, baby, okay? You get that one strong flush of blooms and that's it, which is why a lot of people do consider them to be a little bit more high maintenance when it comes to cut flowers. I personally love stock as a cut flower. I use it as my like line element, or some people call the line element like a spike. I go back and forth between my stock and my snapdragons, just depending on the feel I'm going for or what I have available at that time. It has this really beautiful like clovey, spicy fragrance that it adds to your arrangements, which I think is really delicious and feels very kitcheny and farmy, and it's so good. There are a few different varieties that you can choose from. For cut flowers, you're gonna want those like taller varieties. So varieties like the cats and the iron varieties. I personally grow both, but I prefer to grow the iron variety just because it's not quite as tall. I think the cats do get a little bit taller, so longer stems, but the stem durability for me is really important, and the iron variety of stock have a thicker stem, so they're a little bit more like usable and not as fragile. It's also really beneficial if you're someone like me who's not very good at supporting your plants. If you always forget your netting is going to benefit the cat's variety a little bit more because the stems are softer, so they're not going to grow as strong. They might need a little bit more support. So I like the iron variety. Whether or not you decide to support your flowers with like netting or something like that, that's totally up to you. I do find that even with the iron stock, I still sometimes get like little curvatures in my stems. So it's up to you to kind of make that call and see what you would like to do. And then one thing to note is that you are going to get a mix of single blooms and double blooms. Usually I feel like it's about 50-50, but obviously that percentage can be off by whatever. I did read an article where you can actually tell which little seedlings are going to produce doubles and which ones are going to produce single blooms, and you can go and like weed out the single blooms, which feels a little mean. I don't know why. I don't like the idea of taking out the single blooms. You guys, I am a double bloom girl, okay? So I totally understand the double bloom love. Like would prefer to grow doubles over singles 98% of the time. But the single bloom stock is still really, really pretty. Okay, so don't weed them out. I mean, I guess you can, but I don't know if you want to go through the effort of weeding them out of there. But I'll link the article that I found down below. It's talking about like the leaf types. So it talks a little bit about color, but more importantly, it talks about like the fusion of the leaf. One produces singles, one produces doubles. I don't remember it because I was kind of like, I'm never going to use this information for me personally, but I'll link the article that I found down below. I personally think that using a mix of singles and doubles in your arrangements is really beautiful, and I would recommend that, but whatever works for you. So when it comes to starting your seeds, you can direct sow them in your garden as soon as the ground is workable. So you can do it before your last frost because these are a very cold tolerant plant. So as long as your soil is workable, you can go out and start your seeds directly in your garden. I tried that once and I had like zero luck with it. I don't think anything germinated, and I haven't tried it since. And I kind of did a little bit of research on it, and it seems like stock is just not the flower that does very well with being directly sowed in your garden. So you can try it if you want. There is information out there saying you can do it. If you are someone who direct sows your stock, I would love to hear from you. Please let me know down in the comments if that is something that you do and you think I'm sounding crazy, like it's totally doable. Let me know, please. But from what I know and from my experience, start them indoors. I start all of my stock in my greenhouse, and you can start them indoors even if you don't have a greenhouse. You know, you can just use grow lights. Just make sure that your lights are like pretty close to your soil, because they do need light to germinate. And then the closer it is to those little seedlings when they sprout, that really helps with them not reaching for the light and becoming leggy. Just remember that this is a cool temperature flower, so you don't want to use heat mats when you're starting your seeds, because it'll make the soil too warm and your seedlings either won't germinate or they'll just be kind of unhealthy. So like I said, I start all my seeds in my greenhouse. I either use soil blocks or seed trays. I don't really find that one method over the other really outperforms the other. So whatever you have to work with, I would say just do that. They are pretty easy seed to germinate. Like, I think they make me feel like I'm a great gardener, because I usually have like 90 to 100% germination. They're so easy. But you'll want to sow your seeds about 1/4 of an inch down and just cover them lightly. And then you don't want to like over water them so that they're super soggy, but you do want to keep your soil nice and moist while they're germinating and really starting to like establish in those trays. Now, because stock is a cool temperature plant, it can tolerate light frost. So you can actually transplant them into your garden before your last frost date. So what I do when I start seeds, I think I start them in my greenhouse about 12 or 13 weeks before my last frost date. And then after like 7 or 8 weeks, so there's still like 4 or 5 weeks left before that last frost, I move them and transplant them out into my garden. I'm in zone 9A, so our winter temps don't get like super crazy cold, especially most of the winter. It's like pretty mild, maybe some 20s, 30s, but it doesn't drop super low where I'm at. If you're in an area where your temperature is dropping, 20 degrees, 15 degrees, something like that, you can still move them out into your garden, but make sure you cover them with like a frost cover. That way they're still being protected by those harsher freezes. And let's talk a little bit about hardening off our plants, okay? Because this is something that not great at it, okay? I'm gonna be totally honest with you guys. I am kind of awful when it comes to hardening off my plants, but it is recommended. I don't know about you. I have a full-time job. I am not home to do the hardening off cycles. So for example, to harden off your plants, maybe the first day you bring them out of your greenhouse or out of, inside where you're growing them, and you leave them outside for like an hour, and then you bring them back inside. And then the next day you bring them out for maybe like 3 hours, and then you bring them back inside. And then the next day maybe it's 5 hours, and then you bring them back inside. And then it's 7 hours, and then it's 8 hours, and you're back and forth and back and forth and back. I know it's best for the plant, right? It really sets your plants up to be as strong as they can, as like frost resistant, as pest resistant, like all the good things that you want for your plants. And you just spent so much time starting seeds and caring for them and making sure that they're like growing and they're nurtured, to then just like kick them out into the world. How dare you? How dare I? But I'm very inconsistent with the hardening off phase. I'm not telling you to follow this. I'm just telling you what I do. So like I might bring my plants out maybe the first day for an hour. Maybe it's a Saturday, maybe I'm off. Bring my plants out the first day for an hour, bring them back inside. The next day it's a Sunday, I'm still off from work. I bring them outside, I forget about them, and they're out there for like 4.5 hours. And then Monday is there and I work, so maybe I don't bring them out at all. And then Tuesday I'm like, I should put my plants out for a little bit, and I bring them outside, and then I work for 9 hours, and then I get home and I move them back inside. Do you see how this is like not a really great system that I have here? This is honestly what usually happens. And then what I tend to do is I just leave my greenhouse open so that at nighttime those like cooler temps can kind of move in and they get used to the colder temps. And I just do that, and then I don't move them in and out. So like maybe they get 3 or 4 days of being moved back and forth, and then they get like 4 or 5 days of like the greenhouse just being open. And then I'm like, all right, sink or swim, little babies, we're going to the garden. I'm going to be real with you. I have been generally successful with this terrible system. I don't know if it's dumb luck or if I've stumbled upon the lazy girl's guide to hardening off my plants, which I think might be an example of dumb luck. Anyways, try to be better than me, but also do what you can. Your garden should work for your life. You should not be killing yourself for your garden, right? You can't take time off from your job because you have to transition your plants. So if you need to, maybe just like start them later so that you're planting them after your first frost. And then they have, there's not as many like harsh elements that are going to be working against them. I rambled on about that for a while, but I just wanted you to know that hardening off your plants is very good. We're not all great at it. Sometimes life is in the way. Do what you can. So while these plants can tolerate like frost, what they don't really like to tolerate is really high temperatures. So the reason why I said in the beginning that this plant can be a little bit tricky is because it really does the best in the cooler times of the year. A lot of people, including myself, will succession their stock if they're using them for cut flowers and they want to have them throughout the growing season. Succession planting can be a little bit tricky and like confusing if you've never done it. It's honestly not that bad, but it is a lot of like brain work to think about rotating your garden, timing every few weeks, different successions. It's just a system to kind of get used to. So I have a few different options for you depending on what your climate is. I live in zone 9A. Our temperatures don't get super cold in the winter, and our highs in the summer don't get crazy hot, right? So we get temps in the 90s, especially a little bit more lately, it feels like. But it's very rare that we're like steady in the high 90s, in the hundreds, like it just doesn't get that hot where I'm at. So with that in mind, I have planted my stock in the springtime and just let it grow throughout summer. And like towards like August, the flowers do start to fade. I mean, they're not gonna last all summer, but I plant mine in an area where it's getting like 5 to 6 hours of sun, but then it gets like really nice afternoon shade. So if you're living somewhere where you're not cutting your stock, or you are cutting it, if you have some kind of a shade cloth for those really high temps in the middle of the day, that can be very beneficial, and you can grow them still in those really hot months of summer. Or if they're getting partial shade in the afternoon, that'll also help them stay nice for you in those like hot months. Another option, if you don't want to just set them and forget them, or you don't want to, do succession planting every few weeks, you can just do 2 plantings of your stock on those like shoulder outskirt months. So you can grow your first batch of stock in the springtime, and then towards the end of summer, right before you go into those fall like cooler temps, you can plant your next batch of stock to have going into winter. So that's probably the easiest thing, especially if you have never succession planted, but you want to have more than just one planting of stock, is to just do that spring and fall planting. And that's honestly what I do most of the time, especially it just depends on my growing year. If I don't have time to do a lot of successions, or if I'm experimenting with successioning other plants, then I'll just make life easier on myself and just plant stock in the spring and the fall, and I don't really have to worry too much about them. Stock can be prone to a couple of different like diseases and pests. This can be due to a lot of different things, right? Because anytime your plants are stressed, they're a little bit weaker. So if your plants are underwatered, overfed, if they're not getting enough airflow, if they're pushed past their ideal season. So again, if you're not growing them on the outskirts of those really hot months, that might stress out your plants, especially if they're not getting partial shade. So they will be more prone to mildew, to aphids. I personally have never had like pesty bugs on my stock. So for aphids, sometimes it's because you're over fertilizing your plants. I personally don't fertilize my plants. I say this all the time. I amend my beds before I plant in the spring, and then my plants usually do perfectly fine with just that. But I know a lot of people like to use fertilizers. I would stay away from anything that is like really high in nitrogen. I know this is a plant that can benefit from some nitrogen, so like maybe like a fish fertilizer, something like that, but you don't want to give it too much, especially when they're really young, because it'll promote that like green leafy growth, and that's what the aphids are kind of attracted to. So that's kind of one thing to watch out for. I think most plants in general, they don't really want too much nitrogen in their fertilizer, but stock specifically, just be careful with that. Mildew, I think I've gotten a little bit, but nothing to really like write home about. And I'm not one to really follow spacing guidelines. I think you can plant them pretty close, I find. I put mine, I think like 4 or 5 inches apart. I've never really grown them closer than that. I would be interested if you do, like, just, I think somebody left a comment on one of my last videos saying that they like really pack them in there. And I would be really interested to hear from you how closely you pack them in there. Like, is it closer than 4 inches, or is that kind of where you're at? Because the internet, I believe, suggests that you plant them like 12 inches apart. Let me fact check myself. According to the internet overlords, it says that for stock, you can plant them 6 to 18 inches apart, and that taller varieties need 12 to 18 inches apart. I have never planted my stock 12 inches apart, let alone 18 inches apart. That feels absolutely wild. I don't have that much room in my gardens. That's crazy. Okay, so I think I've kind of experimented. Some of my videos you've probably seen in the past where they seem pretty far apart. They're probably like, I don't know, 8-9 inches apart, and I've slowly just kind of in different areas compacted them to where they're closer, and I find that like 5 inches feels pretty good for mine. So just keep all that kind of stuff in mind when you're planning out your gardens. And if you're thinking like, wow, this flower is just like not for me, I do not want to grow this as a cut flower, I get it. Like I said, I almost talked myself out of growing it, okay, for next year, but I don't know who she was, okay? Some crazy person who took over my brain and tried to make me stop growing stock. Obviously, I can't not grow stock. But if you can, if you're like, absolutely not, I'm not growing this flower, I have some alternatives for you. Okay, so maybe you, first of all, want to grow just like a smaller variety. So there's a lot of the Cinderella varieties of stock are like a dwarf variety. They're really beautiful. You can plant them kind of as like a border flower. They still have that really nice clovey, spicy smell with the fragrance of stock. It's so interesting to me because they just perform the best in coolness, okay? So if you want to really get the most out of that fragrance, walk your garden in the morning. Walk your garden when it's still like pretty cool outside, and you're gonna get that like big like waft of clovey spiciness from that fragrance. Once the sun comes out, once they're in the heat, the fragrance kind of like goes away. It's not as strong, but the Cinderella stock, it's so beautiful as a little dwarf variety. It's mostly double blooms. They're just not great for cutting because they're little bitty guys. But just like all the other varieties of stock, you can grow them in pots. Just remember that when you're growing any stock in pots, the soil temp does heat up a lot faster. Keep that in mind. Also, I should have mentioned that earlier. So maybe give them a little bit of afternoon shade if you're planting them in pots. They really need like 6 hours of good sunlight. They do like a lot of sun. They just don't like heat. I'm telling you, they're a tricky little beauty. Okay, so it's an enigma that you're gonna have to crack on your own, but just keep these variables in mind. And then if you're just like, I don't want to bother with it, no thank you, grow snapdragons. Okay, snapdragons are so beautiful, and they're a little bit easier. They're still a cool temperature flower, so you can, you know, start them early. You can transplant them a little bit early. They are a flower that instead of being like a one-hit wonder, they're a medium producer. So when they're young, like little plantlings, you're gonna pinch them, and that will promote branching. So you'll get more than one stem per plant, which is awesome. You do not want to pinch your stock, okay? Don't do it. It's a one stem flower. please don't pinch it. But snapdragons you can absolutely pinch. And then after you cut them once, they'll still send up another bloom. It might not be as big and as strong as that first initial bloom, but it will send up another bloom. And they're still gonna add that really beautiful like line spike element to your cut flowers. So my favorite varieties of snaps are the Madam Butterfly. They're frilly, they're doubles. You can't go wrong with those. But alternatives aside, I will say that I personally feel like stock is a very sneaky cut flower favorite. It's very soft, it's unexpected, it's got a vintage vibe, and it is completely worth it to grow, in my opinion. So please let me know down in the comments if you also love stock, if you've given up on it altogether, if you're a succession planter, if you are a wizard at direct sowing your seeds. Let me know, okay? Because I am not that wizard. I cannot get it to work for me, and I would love to hear from you. And then as always, if you have any questions, if there was something that I didn't cover or if it was confusing, please let me know. I usually have all this information in my head and I just kind of like jumble it out in front of my camera, and I'm probably forgetting things. So please let me know if you have any questions. And I think that's it. So I will see you guys in the next one.